Hey folks, welcome back. Time to talk some more about Star Trek Adventures, and today we're going to feature what I think is basically an essential source book if you're going to do a Starfleet-based game, and that is Utopia Planitia, and it's all about starships in Starfleet, basically. It's got a huge amount of new content in here. It's a pretty thick source book, bigger than the Command Division source books and those kind of things. And there's a lot of stuff in here. So you can see there's an extensive discussion of Starfleet's history, information on operations aboard a starship, including daily life, locations, blah, 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 guidance on how to create your group's home in the stars, whether it's a starship or space station, and how to make that home a character in its own right. Advice on building a hero starship or station from existing and new templates. A complete system for creating your own space frames. Updated game stats and graphics for over 70 Federation space frames, space stations, and small craft. GM advice and optional rules to enable amazing ship or station-based storytelling experiences. And a handy Starfleet reference for gamers and non-gamers alike. So yeah, tons of stuff in here. And I love the cover as well, because if you look really closely, you can see lots of nice details in here. You can see little worker bee shuttles moving around. You can see some poor guy putting a replacement panel in right there. On this Constitution-class starship. There's lots of cool little things happening. A shuttle with tractor beams reattaching nacelles to this Miranda-class. I love the little details that they put in on these covers. It really shows you, again, that the developers on this line really care about the property. And we can see that again here with the end papers, which have a lovely sort of comparison of a number of space frames that appear in the book. Those of you who are savvy and know a bit of Starfleet Online, the MMO, will recognize some ships from that have made it into the STA game now. So we have the Odyssey class up here from Star Trek Online. We have the Sutherland, we have the Gagarin, there's a few others in here as well. Fan favorites have made it in as well, like the Akira class, Prometheus, all sorts of great stuff is in here. And that's just a taste, really. I mean, there's loads and loads of space frames. And you can see that from the table of contents. So we've got introduction section, legacy of Starfleet and their origins, daily life and Starfleet operations. Then we have a huge design section, which also includes lots of new weapons and talents as well, which is cool. And then we get into the list of space frames themselves. I'm going to go through those pretty rapidly because I don't want to spoil everything for you. And also, just buy the damn book. It's great. Yeah, so we get to, it's an over 256-page book, just packed with Starfleet info. So I consider it, if you're going to do a Federation game, you should have this book, especially if you're going to be in a ship or starbase of any kind. So we start off with a foreword from the Associate Art Director of Star Trek Online, just basically saying how glad they are to be a part of the STA world now. And then we've got the introduction chapter to Boldly Go. So we're talking about sort of the growth of Starfleet and also the growth of Star Trek as intellectual property. So they say this sourcebook builds on the existing Star Trek Adventures sandbox setting and populates that sandbox with additional space frames, stations, and small craft that you and your fellow players can use to enhance your missions and campaigns, no matter what era of play you choose to use. So they really want this to be a sort of all-inclusive, one-stop Starfleet reference, and I think they've done a great job with it. So they outline the supplement structure, which we've kind of already gone through, how to use the source book, and then one thing I really like is essential viewing. This has become frequently appearing in a number of the supplements. You'll see this in the Klingon Empire core rulebook as well, of course. You will have seen that. So it gives you some key episodes to watch that predominantly feature a starship or space station doing something cool. So they include things from the movies, Picard, Lower Decks, Discovery, Enterprise, Voyager, the whole Star Trek line to date, which is really great. So definitely recommend following the advice here if you want to get the feeling for how to tell compelling starship-based stories. Those are some really great examples. And as always, we have lovely artwork throughout, Starfleet schematics. Here we see Excelsior class. There we go. So, we have a side view, top view, front view, duty status report. We've got primary system status pointing to all the phaser banks, sensors, all that kind of stuff. A map even of the turbolift network, which is pretty cool as well. As always, loads of flavor presented in the book, in the layout. In this book, we actually start moving the timeline forward a little bit. So since Star Trek Online is being included, we've gone from 2371 all the way up to 2410, basically. So we're kind of moving ahead in the timeline a little bit. But they also go all the way back to the beginning of Federation and, 2063, when Zephyr and Cochrane launched the Phoenix and the first viable warp drive and made first contact with the Vulcans. So we really get a full background into the advancement of humanity in space, the early days of Starfleet as an organization, the Confederacy of Vulcan, contacts with the Andorian Empire. Of course, we have all these, again, log notes and bits of personalized info scattered throughout the book as well to give us more perspective on individual level. We have the encounters with the Tellarites, Coalition of Planets, and the Earth-Romulan War, which was not a great thing for anybody, and a nice picture there of a classic Romulan-style warbird and the various insignia that could be found on them. Then the Galaxy of the 23rd Century, So we're moving ahead into the kind of original series timeline, and then we get into the 24th century. So the development of replicators drastically changed starship life, basically. And then we start encountering new threats like the Borg. We have new diplomatic relations with the Klingons, kinds of changes to politics with the emergence of the Bajoran-Cardassian conflict and the Dominion Wars and the brutality of said wars. So yeah, then we get into the visions for the 25th century. So this is where we're getting into kind of new stuff. So we're going beyond quantum torpedoes and that kind of thing, and there's new designs that are possible in this era. So that includes detachable hulls, like the Prometheus class. We can split into multiple ships for combat purposes. We have armor, which you find thanks to the return of Voyager, basically, which brought with it Borg tech, essentially. Holographic emitters, so that's kind of our emergency medical hologram type stuff, which got enhanced again through future tech. Quantum and transphasic torpedoes, transwarp drives. I mean, there's all sorts of new stuff popping up as we get into the 20th century. Now, of course, that's all optional. You don't have to use that in your game, but, as a GM, you probably want to have a discussion with your players about, what period of Starfleet history do we want to exist in, and therefore what's relevant to us in these different eras. What technologies would we use? I love this 2-page outlay here about the different Starfleet bridge designs. So these are classics. We have the original Constitution class with the diagram, and the key locations are all marked out. We have the Galaxy class, of course, the Enterprise D. They're different setups. Then we have the Connie refit from the movies, the Intrepid class, which is Voyager. We've got the classic Miranda class, the Defiant, which we see in Deep Space Nine, the Luna class, which is the Titan, and the Sovereign class, which is, of course, the Enterprise E. So this is really great to have as well for reference when you're dealing with, if you have an invasion on board your player's ship and you've got people, Romulans swarming the bridge or something, then you'll need to know what you can hide behind, where things are, where the turbolifts are, and this gives you that all in 2 pages for some really key vessels. So that's really handy. They also define, some basic terminology. You'll need to know how computers are used aboard a ship and how computer technology evolved from era to era. So we started out with semiconductors like today, then quantum computing through duotronics, then isolinear chips, which we found in the Next Generation. Then we have binaural gel packs, which we found in Voyager, and positronic networks, which we found inside Data and his colleagues. Then we have examples of, dealing with things that can happen problematically with your chip computing programs, like viruses, pose tasks when you're trying to do something complex on the computer system. And then we have a bit about downtime on the ship. So there'll be a crew lounge. Typically you'll have various games available to play, various drinks from different parts of the galaxy that you can get from the replicator. You'll have a holodeck as well, eventually, in the TNG timeline and afterward. And they even have little D20 tables for random martial arts to try in the gym or random games to play in the lounge or anywhere else. You'll also have observation lounges, usually on the top deck of the ship. So basically, when you got some time off and you just want to chill and watch space fly by at warp speed. So you'll have the mess hall, particularly in the past, was a big deal, kind of like the galley of a ship in current days, but with the advent of replicators being everywhere, that diminished in importance somewhat as time went on. They have a lovely little D20 chart here as well for random holodeck story starters. We had a lot of stories in TNG and stuff about holodeck programs going wrong. So that they have some examples here of how that could happen. I mean, it's a great, amazing form of entertainment, but it really seems horribly dangerous. And then we have some stuff about evacuation procedures on a starship, how headings are measured. So you'll often hear, they'll call out to the helm, a heading of 000 mark something. So that'll be they have azimuth angles and elevation angles is what they're talking about. So they talk about navigation and propulsion methods, keeping up with Star Trek canon, where the kind of galaxy maps have changed over time. Really lots of useful information for dealing with the different sort of manifestations of Starfleet life over the centuries. Then we get into weapons and defensive systems, just the basics. So, of course, phasers, disruptors, and photon torpedoes, which you know about. And there's a nice little guideline here about moving at the speed of plot. So basically, while it would be nice to, for some people to work out, okay, it actually would take us 6 days to warp from planet X to planet Y, and, then that factors into how quickly we can achieve task Z, but sometimes you just need the starship to get to someplace and just get the plot moving. So you can use it as an opportunity for an extended task or a linear challenge. So they're racing against time, but you're not actually measuring time out and working out warp factors and so on. There's a little nice sidebar here as well about different FTL technologies. So warp was, of course, the key moment for humanity when we expanded into the galaxy. But then we have subspace corridors and transwarp conduits, which is where we get races like the Borg using. Then we have the quantum slipstream drive, which was a later development. And then wormholes and spatial folding, which of course we see in the Bajoran wormhole around Deep Space Nine. Then we get into defensive systems. We've got deflector shields, point defense weapons, which try to shoot down incoming torpedoes. And then passive defenses, so that's stuff like the ablative armor and polarized hull plating. And the ships are always blessed with inertial dampening fields, which is basically so that when they accelerate quickly or get hit by something, the crew don't get turned into chunky salsa, because there's a huge shift in inertia from one moment to the next. And many collisions are prevented, of course, by the starship's navigational deflector beam, which is always sticking out the front of the ship. Basically, it pushes things aside that could collide with the ship. And there's a nice little section here on, when you're going down to a planet, do we take the shuttle or the transporter? And there are different reasons why you might want to do each, which they go into. So transporters can be more attractive than a shuttle if, for example, it's a very turbulent atmosphere, but the transporter can't penetrate everything and could be inhibited by certain materials. So there are different circumstances where you may want to choose one transport over the other, and that can be worked into the story to add to the tension. Going down by shuttle takes longer than transporter. You may need to have, a specifically timed moment when transport can happen. So, your characters need to get everything done and reach a key extraction point before the ion storm comes in. I mean, it gives you loads of ideas just by reading through how you can use these little aspects to make your story more exciting. Then we talk about how to get through a planetary landing situation with a larger scale ship, and the role of shuttle bays and flight decks basically on the ship. So now we have resource collection. So these are kind of rare minerals, exotic metals and stuff that have high value and are useful in ships to varying degrees. So there's a list of different, these have all been sort of mentioned in the canon to some point or another. So we've often heard of iridium, dilithium, of course, which is facilitating the use of warp cores in Starfleet ships. Latinum is a rare liquid metal which is stored in gold and is used mainly as currency, particularly by the Ferengi. A lot of this stuff will be familiar to fans of the show, so we don't need to go through all that. But, it gives you basically a guideline to set out new reasons to do survey missions. You might be looking for particular resources, a new dilithium mine, or, you're following a Ferengi plot to, smuggle latinum, or all kinds of cool stuff could be set up. You could be in a fight over mining rights, resource extraction techniques. So again, more possible stories, seeds, and ideas, and they have some of those very things right here in the sidebar, and even a random table for mining hazards if you do actually go into that aspect of a plot. And they mention that lack of resources make for good plots, right? If you're running out of a certain key element, you're running out of dilithium, you're running out of something you need for your journeys, then they can make for a great source of tension and a great source of direction in a campaign. And they have a random table as well for a particular element that you might need for resupply, for example. Then there are, different ways of negotiating or retrieving supplies, and when that occasionally the desperate need for supplies might conflict with the prime directive. If the material you desperately need is on a planet that hasn't achieved warp travel yet. Then we get into salvage and retrieval. So some species like the Packleds are favorites from lower decks. Just basically cobble together parts from alien vessels, and they call them clump ships. They have components and weapons from over 30 different species that could form one single ship. So there's different kinds of salvage and retrieval operations that you might take part in. So, you might try and retrieve functional bits of tech from ships that were destroyed in battle. You might try and save cargo from a derelict vessel. And there's some sample encounters for ways that you could work salvage and retrieval into a Starfleet campaign. Then we get to the design bureau. So here we really get into the mechanics of starships within the game. So, the starship is in effect a main character within the show just as much as your actual characters. They make that point repeatedly in the core book and here as well. And so as a result, the ship should be made meaningful. It should be something that the players care about. They should name it, they should customize it, they should understand what their mission is and care about it. And here, they go through the specific eras of play that link to the different key Star Trek series. So that might make it easier for players who are not super into Star Trek canon to understand, well, if I want something like Lower Decks or TNG, then I need to think about, we're flying between in the 24th century or in the very late 24th to early 25th century, that kind of thing. And I love the random tables again. So we have a table of ship idiosyncrasies. So, every hologram program references the number 47. Just a weird thing, just a weird quirk. When phases are fired, the ship's hull produces a buzzing sound. Each ship will have its own little quirks. They're built to incredibly high standards by the expert engineers of the Federation and Utopia Planitia, but that doesn't mean that little weirdnesses won't creep in, and that makes your ship more personalized to your players. The scale of a ship also kind of comes in, and it's described in more detail here. So they give you examples of ship scales, Galaxy class and Sovereign class, which are famous obviously to TNG fans, are at scale 6. There's a list of example traits that could be assigned to different types of ships. So the USS Defiant is a warship, as is the Prometheus. Temporally displaced ship could be the USS Bozeman or the USS Discovery, which ends up in the 32nd century. Flagships like the Enterprise, all these traits could add, again, different talents and specialties to your space frame. That'll make it more personalized. So they give lots of examples as well, as usual. So here the group wanted to create a ship that specializes in frontline combat. So they want to focus on weapons and durability. So they decided to start with Akira class because it has a system score of 11 in both structure and weapons. It also comes with the ablative armor talent, which makes it more resilient, and rapid fire torpedo launchers, which will help it attack. So, they give you examples of how you can take your ship and make it your own. Then they get into what makes our ships unique, the idiosyncrasies. What is its backstory? What happened to the ship before you were on it? How long has it been in the fleet? Has it been through wars and refitted? Has it been through, temporal displacement, come back? What's it gone up against before you were placed on it? And then you can get into some really weird stuff, like your ship could be sentient. Maybe it has a sentient AI, which was touched on in The Next Generation. Or it could have a new kind of technological integration or biological integration. You see in Discovery, for example, with the mycelium drive thing. And then again, we have a nice cutaway of diagram of the Miranda class, where we see the placement of various decks, phaser banks, and so forth, and a top-down view over here. So now we have a detailed system for space frame creation. So we won't go into this because I think it's a major plus point for the book. Basically, you get a certain number of system points depending on which polity you're coming from. In the year, you'll get a certain number of system points. Then you choose your scale. You assign points to different departments. Choose talents, weapons, and then you can add traits, special rules, refits, and then you get into your mission profile. And also you can improve your starship through milestones, that might lead to you getting a refit or, getting more attention from Starfleet, basically. There's also, you can create small craft, so these can be shuttlecraft, pods, or runabouts. Again, it's a very similar process. You assign your system and department points, choosing their base talents and any special rules that might apply, and then your final steps would be any specific traits or refits that might apply to your small craft. And then there's a similar system again for space stations. We know from DS9 that having a series set on a space station can be just as compelling as exploring space, although they did eventually bring in the Defiant, so we had a bit of both. And then we get into some basic space frame mission profiles. So we have some additional ones beyond what was in the core book. So we have battle cruisers, which have new things like ablative armor, fast targeting systems, rapid fire torpedoes. We have civilian merchant marine ships. We have crisis and emergency response, colony support, entertainment ships and pleasure ships, espionage, so they'll have electronic warfare, slim sensor silhouettes, all that kind of cool stuff. Flagships, so that would be Enterprise, for example. Logistical ships, multi-world explorers, pathfinder and reconnaissance ships, patrol vessels, which would be, trying to patrol borders like the neutral zone, reserve fleet, so they're often older vessels kind of on standby duty, survey and scientific ships, strategic and diplomatic operations, tactical operations, technical testbed, and warship. Some of these we've seen in the core rulebook as well, I think, but they've been updated here with some additional possible talents. And then for stations as well, we have different possible components and mission profiles. So administration and bureaucracy is one example. Could be border enforcement, could be a communication hub, a key part of the Federation. Could be a defense station mounted along the neutral zone or something like that. Could be kind of a neutral meeting point for different independent sovereign policies to meet and have meetings and diplomatic relations. Could be a dry dock or system repair base. Could be for education and training of personnel. Could be intelligence or special operations bases, which are usually top secret. And they might not even be acknowledged by their governments, basically. And in those cases, you need to have, electronic warfare systems, high communications, computers and sensors are a must. It could be a logistical and tactical support station. So, resupplying ships that are, close to battle or close to tactically important objectives. Could be a political station. So Deep Space Nine, prior to and during the Dominion War, the Deep Space Nine under Cisco played a key role in Alpha Quadrant politics, particularly as a touch point to Gamma Quadrant politics, such as the Dominion. So, they're giving you a nice example of, how space station could fit into this. And it could be a research station like the Armagosa Observatory that was used for scientific research about the star of Armagosa. Now we get into weapons, and we got some new stuff in here. And it also, I think, clarifies a little bit for some players how the different weapons are supposed to work and how making ship attacks work. It reminds you that making a starship weapon attack requires control plus security, assisted by the ship's weapons plus security. Energy weapons start at difficulty 2, and torpedoes are difficulty 3, and then you modify the difficulty according to what you want to do. So if the range is long, you add difficulty. If you're targeting a specific subsystem, add difficulty. If you're bigger in scale than the target ship, you'll add 1 difficulty. -1 difficulty if the attacking ship is exceeded at an attack pattern task, and +2 if firing a spinal lance, because that's like a huge weapon that only faces one direction, so you have to get it perfectly aligned for it to fire. And then we have some new types of beams. We've got anti-proton beams, introduced in the 21st century, which are high yield. We've got electromagnetic or ionic beams, which were earlier on. We have free lasers in the 21st century. We've got graviton beams, which are piercing and devastating. We've got phase polarons, which you've seen before, phaser pulse weapons, and tetrion beams, which now have the depleting stress effect as well. So there's some cool new stuff in here, and then they explain each of those new types of energy weapons here. So again, the tetrion beam is another 25th century one. We got some new types of torpedoes as well. So we've got the highly advanced chronoton torpedoes. So they create temporal shifts and slow down time for the target, causing it to move slowly around the battlefield. They have a stress rating of 3 challenge dice plus security, and have both the calibration and slowing weapon qualities. We have gravimetric weapons, or torpedoes rather, which tear at an enemy's hull and were invented by the Borg. We have neutronic torpedoes, which are built on quantum torpedo tech. They have dampening stress and the calibration quality. We have nuclear torpedoes. They have vicious 1 and calibration. Photons, we know them. Photonic, they were the predecessor to photon torpedoes. So they're a little bit weaker, but still have the high yield quality. The plasma torpedoes, of course, we know those from the core rulebook. Polaron torpedoes, they were installed on some Klingon ships after the Dominion War. They have piercing 2 stress effect and calibration quality. We have positron torpedoes, which were used by the Dominion. They have the dampening effect and the calibration quality. Then we have quantum torpedoes, which are implemented by the Federation. They have vicious 1, calibration, and high yield qualities. Spatial torpedoes were predecessors even to photonic torpedoes, so we're going way back. Tetrionic torpedoes are primarily used as against targets with heavy defenses, like shields and big armor on their hulls. So they don't do that much damage, but they deplete, and they have the calibration quality. Transphasic torpedoes are basically capable of phasing through shields altogether, so they have a piercing quality and the calibration and devastating qualities as well. Then we have tricobalt torpedoes, so they have the area, stress effect, and calibration. They produce huge explosions, and everything, of course, summarized in the table here. Then we introduce mines, which is very cool, and adds that kind of submarine combat flavor you can get in Star Trek at times, where, you're flying through a nebula and you're trying to trap the cloaked ship, So there are different types of mines with different types of payload. They can have area effects, which we know from the core rulebook. Dampening, so it removes a point of the target's power. Depleting removes an additional 1 for shields for each effect rolled. Persistent, we know that at the end of each round, the target suffers an additional X stress and lasts for a number of rounds according to the number of effects you roll. Piercing, X ignores X points of the target's total resistance. Spread, if 1 or more effects are rolled, the attack causes an additional hit. It deals half the damage of the initial hit plus 1 for every effect rolled after the first. The additional hit is resolved separately, reduced by resistance, reduces shields, and potentially causes an additional breach. So some photon torpedo launchers can launch a full spread and do that. Vicious X, that means just X additional stress for each effect rolled. As far as mines, we as well have a few different types. There's blackout mines. They interfere with sensors and can cause the ship to collide with multiple mines. And they have the jamming weapon quality. There's also blade mines, so they use mechanical spinning blades to slice into an enemy's hull. They have a piercing 2 effect. And then we have a whole list of other types of mines, which again, we can use similar types as we do torpedoes. And we have the additional explanation of the new weapon qualities. Well, some of them are new. Calibration and devastating, we know. Hidden X, we know. High yield. Jamming means that the difficulty for all sensor and con tasks the target makes is increased by 1. So useful for Starfleet intelligence, that kind of stuff. And slowing. Until the end of the round, characters on board the target cannot use to keep the initiative momentum spend. And that can be devastating when your ship is down to its last legs. And that we get from the Chronoton torpedoes and mines. Then we get into the use of tractor beams. So the difficulty of any task an enemy ship uses to try and escape the tractor beam is equal to the tractor beam's strength. So when you have a Galaxy-class starship with a strength 5 tractor beam, that means it's quite difficult to get free from. And it gives you an idea of different ways to try and escape the tractor beam's grip, which is useful. Then we got some sidebars about using the warp core as a weapon. So you can jettison the warp core as a desperate method to create a huge explosion, or using the ship as a weapon, which is basically ramming. So both targets will suffer immense damage, but again, useful perhaps as a last-ditch effort. Then we got spaceframe talents. So we got all sorts of new stuff, as well as things we've seen previously. We've got ablative armor generation, which is only for the 20th century. Got ablative field projectors. Got new stuff as well, like adaptable energy weapons, advanced emergency crew holograms. So that's building on what we saw in Voyager. Advanced medical ward or advanced sick bay. So gives you an advantage applying to all tasks related to medicine biology performed within the ward or in sick bay. You can have advanced research facilities, advanced sensor suites, advanced shields, advanced transporters, automated defenses, automatic return. So if the ship computer system goes for 10 days without commands, it automatically pilots itself back to home base at maximum impulse. You have the captain's yacht. So some ships will have a dedicated additional support craft that the captain can use as they see fit. You can have cloaked mines. So mines that the ship places have the hidden 2 weapon quality. It's nasty, by the way. Cloaking devices, also nasty. You can have a command ship. You can have dedicated personnel for a single department. You can have a dedicated subspace transceiver array, which again is good for intelligence gathering. You can have deluxe galleys, you can have diplomatic suites, you can have dual environments. So that means that basically crew who need different atmospheres and stuff can work together. Electronic warfare systems. So whenever you succeed on an intercept or signal jamming task, you can spend 2 momentum to affect an additional ship, which is pretty awesome. Here we have some stats for the emergency medical hologram, by the way, which is cool. We have expanded munitions, so you can add additional energy delivery systems or additional storage for torpedoes and mines. You can have expansive departments, extensive shuttle bays, fast targeting, grappler cables to grab onto objects, high-powered tractor beams. So the ship's tractor beam has a strength 2 higher than normal. Further, when somebody attempts to escape, the ship may spend power to increase its strength for that attempt. Strength increases by 1 for every 2 power spent. You can have improved damage control, improved hull integrity, improved impulse drive, improved power systems, improved shield recharge, better warp drives, multi-vector assault mode. So that's what the Prometheus does. So it's a step beyond the saucer separation talent. Basically, the ship splits into 3 separate ships, each of which has its own stats. It has a scale 1 less than the original ship and has 1/3 the power. You also need to have the redundant systems propulsion talent. Otherwise, each ship will just kind of split apart and then stand still, which wouldn't make sense. You can have rapid-fire torpedoes, regenerative hulls, which is basically reverse-engineered Borg tech. Social separation, of course, we see that in the Galaxy class. Self-replicating mines, which is pretty cool. Tachyon detection fields. So basically it helps you detect cloaked targets. You can have variable geometry warp fields. So that gives you basically an advantage in any scene where there's difficulties maintaining a stable warp field. You can have versatile tractor beams that can deplete or drain the enemy as well as grabbing onto them. And then we have some talents just for space stations. So additional docking capacity, dry dock. So has fabrication and repair for facilities for starships. They could be self-propelled, have repair crews, all that sort of good stuff. And now we get into the space frames. So we give the summary of how the stats are laid out. And certain space frames have the ability to be fitted with mission pods. So basically, they will modify the ship to a certain degree to fit a certain type of mission. So things like the Miranda class and stuff that have pods can be modified in that way. So we're going way back to 2102 here in the beginning, and we're going through basically in temporal order, I think. Warp Delta, 2125. So another pretty early ship. Daedalus class from 2140. You can see nice early Starfleet design. I love the weird spherical hull ships. Those always look kind of funny to me. You can see their ratings are not so good. We're going, way back in history here. Bonuses to engineering and science, but nothing else as far as departments go. Then we have the NX-01 from 2151. The star of the show Enterprise, of course. So this was the state of the art at the time. It had phase cannons, spatial torpedoes, and grappler cables. So we weren't into the era of, tractor beams and all that stuff. But it can later get a refit, which is outlined here. So you get some weapon upgrades and some talents, additional talents like being a command ship. We have the Intrepid class. So again, 2152 coming out just after the NX-01. Very similar in stats, in fact. And there's an example, the Nimitz class. And then we have the Walker class, 2195. So this has that kind of new school Discovery sort of look to it, despite being older. And now we're getting into having some photon torpedoes and tractor beams, which is always useful. And we have an example of the USS Shenzhou, which of course we saw in the first season of Discovery, I believe. Then we have the Shepherd of the Gagarin class. So they were launched in 2195. The USS Gagarin is from 2256. So you can see these ships can hang around a long ass time. And here this one has some additional talents like rugged design and redundant systems beyond the basic space frame. And that's the way the book goes. Basically, we get every space frame, and then we get an example of a particular class. So you could just grab that and use it for your game, or you could, do the recommended thing and grab a space frame that appeals to your group, and then customize it and name it yourselves, which I think is much more fun. But it's nice that they give you examples, and if you really want to play, the crew of the Enterprise, then you can do that, or whatever key examples of certain classes of ship. This thing is really ugly. The Hoover class, I don't like that. The Malachowski, that's a pretty cool looking one. Looks a bit like a warship type design, but basically it was more of an escort ship. Although it does have the mission profile battlecruiser, this USS Mohawk. So I guess it could be refitted to a nice battle-oriented configuration. The Engel class, the Nimitz class, that's a very cool looking one as well. I like that, leading us toward the Miranda class. Now this one, does it have the possibility of pods? Maybe not. But it does have phaser banks and phaser cannons. So we've got this additional set of nacelles up there. It's got improved warp and extensive shuttle bays as well, which is helpful. But the Hiawatha class, which is a long, ugly thing. Forget about that one. The Hermes class, which is the classic destroyer, basically. One of the early designs for the Starfleet technical manual was just a single warp engine. And we have an example of the USS River Rouge, NCC 1557 from 2284. And, of course, the classic Constitution class. So we have the basic space frame. And an example, we have the NC-1701 from 2269. So this is the movie refit, basically, it seems like. So we got phaser banks, photon torpedoes, tractor beam of strength 3, independent power systems, modular laboratories, independent phaser power supply, and a rugged design. Designed to be long-serving, exploration ship, but well able to defend itself. The Antares class, pretty ugly. The Crossfield class, so of course the USS Discovery is the primary example of that. It has a special rule of the displacement-activated spore hub drive, so there's some explanation of the special rule here. And it's a highly experimental space frame, so it should only be used for certain types of missions, basically. We have the Archer class, with the key example being the USS Centaur. We have the Miranda class, which I really like. Suggested mission profiles, multiple cruiser, tactical, scientific, and survey. So they're originally designed to be warships, basically, because they have this additional weapons bay on the top here. The USS Reliant was a key example of this class. So they have phaser banks with high damage, photon torpedoes, advanced sensors, extensive shuttle bays, and redundant systems as well. Pretty tough little ship, and there are lots of refits and variants. So some would even see the addition of quantum torpedoes later on. It was a very popular long-lasting space frame. We have the Oberth class, which is usually used for technical testbed and scientific operations. The Soyuz class, of course, named after the Soyuz Soviet rocket program. And we have the USS Bozeman as a classic example of that from 2370. Then we have the Sydney class, the example of the WS Ulana Kontaji. Don't know what that is. Yeah, we'll just skip past that. The Excelsior class. So we have the prime example of the Uss Enterprise B with a catastrophic shakedown cruise, of course. But it looked pretty cool at the time. Good phaser banks, strong torpedoes, a strength 4 tractor beam, diplomatic suites, better impulse and warp drive, and secondary reactors. So, and it had the traits of the Great Experiment and Legendary. So this was meant to be a flagship, but didn't work out too well. Then we have the Centaur class, which has oddly thin nacelles on it. This might be is this a Starfleet Online one? I'm not sure. Anyway, there's the USS Elysium as an example. So a technical testbed. It has a number of improved systems and secondary reactors. We've got the lovely Constellation class. The classic example, of course, would be the USS Stargazer under the command of Picard. But instead, we have the USS Eranos Eoth. So she was named after a goddess from a culture on ancient Andoria. that had painted the stars on the canvas of the sky. So she was traditionally Andorian. That's interesting. Phaser banks, photon torpedoes, and tractor beam with strength 3. Extensive shuttle bays, improved warp and impulse, and a rugged design. Launched in 2375, so TNG era. The lovely Ambassador class, which I think the ill-fated USS Enterprise C was supposed to be Ambassador class, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty big ship, scale 5, so just below the Galaxy class and so forth. The USS Cumberland is the example here, so it's a multi-role explorer. It's got phaser arrays, so they're versatile too, and they can do area or sprite attacks. We've got photon torpedoes, tractor beam strength 4, which is pretty good. High-res sensors and advanced sensor suites, and saucer separation. It's always nice to have in case of emergencies. Then you have the Cheyenne class, again from the TNG era. Another 4 nacelle design, and it's got, improved warp drive as well. Then we have the Springfield class, launched in 2387. This version, the USS Randar's Curiosity, commanded by a husband and wife from the Yanaba family. So it has some nice phaser arrays, photon torpedoes, tractor beam strength 3, pretty decent sensors at maximum capacity basically. And it's got high-res sensors as a talent, and redundant systems for sensors as well. So good for exploration. We have the Raven class. So this is a bit of a fan favorite. I've seen a few videos on this one. It's strong in computers and sensors and comms, all with 11. They're relatively small, so it's good if you want to have a kind of something beyond a runabout, but it's still a larger vessel with more power behind it. It has phaser banks, but no torpedoes, but it's got advanced sensors and high-res sensors on this one. Got the Niagara class with triple nacelles, very weird looking. Launched in 2376. The USS Kitchener was the example given here. We've got advanced labs, phaser arrays, photons, strength 4 tractor beam, redundant engines. Of course, we can see one right there. And a rugged design. So it's good as a multi-role explorer or pathfinder and reconnaissance operations. Then we have the wonderful Galaxy class, my favorite. Nostalgia overrides everything else. So we had a special rule here as well, where prior to the Dominion War, Galaxy-class vessels usually had a number of civilian experts on board, often part of the science division of Starfleet. So they can be used basically once per adventure. A newly created supporting character may begin as though they had already been activated once before to represent the expertise typically found on the Galaxy. It's very, very cool. The USS Enterprise D is, of course, the classic example. Multi-role explorer, Federation flagship, 6th to bear the name Enterprise. It has powerful phaser arrays, photon torpedoes, tractor beam with strength 5. It's got a captain's yacht, big shuttle bays, big laboratories, redundant systems because of the saucer separation deal, and it's got saucer separation and secondary reactors. So a classic ship, and then one any player I think would be proud to pilot. Got the Challenger class. This is a funny little 2 nacelle design arranged vertically. The USS Red Baron is an example here. So it's got backup EPS conduits, improved warp drive, and redundant sensor systems. But yeah, it's got pretty good engines, so it's a fast little bugger. And good sensors and computers, but not much of a warship, I would say. Likewise, the Freedom class. So got good ratings in engines and sensors here. Weapons at 10 is not too bad, actually. So these can be fast, nippy little destroyers for tactical operations, I would think. And that's the USS Waterwheel, which is an interesting name. Then we have the Nebula class, known for their huge sensor pods back here. So they have the special rule of mission pod. So that provides 2 talents that count towards the maximum normally allowed. The entire mission pod can be swapped out as if it were a single talent. So then we can go back to the beginning of the listings, look at the mission pod, and decide what you want to have here. So a good example is the USS Sequoia, who's used for strategic and diplomatic ops. It has phaser arrays, photon torpedoes, tractor beam strength 4. Then it has electronic warfare systems, thanks to this big AWACS business here. Redundant comm systems, advanced shields, and it's a command ship as well. So Nebula-class ships are really useful in that you can swap out this pod to add additional sensor systems, weapon systems, labs, all kinds of cool stuff depending on your mission profile. We've got the New Orleans class, scale 4, so a little bit on the smaller side. Yeah, pretty much solid performer across the board. Not too great as a warship perhaps, but more for scientific operations and multi-world explorers. We have the example of the USS Higgins, launched in 2376. Then we have the fan favorite Akira class. They are scale 5, so we're on cruiser level here. They got phaser arrays, quantum torpedoes, strength 4 tractor beam as base, and they also have ablative armor, extensive shuttle bays, and in fact they had fighters in the some of the fan cannon And rapid-fire torpedoes. Very, very cool. So their weapons rating is high at 11. We have the example here of the USS Harrington. So here we have our phaser arrays, quantum torpedoes with 8 dice of damage, vicious 1, calibration, and high yield. Tractor beam strength 4, which is great. Ablative armor to help protect you. It's a command ship. It's got electronic warfare as well as the extensive shuttle bays and rapid-fire torpedoes. So pretty hot ship to go and get into a fight with. I like that. The picture here, though, is the USS Thunderchild. But yeah, the Harrington is the example ship. Then we have the Nova class, which was a cute ship that first appeared, I believe, in Voyager. It's a very attractive design for some reason to me. I like this. And it has some... Basically, it's more of a kind of explorer and scientific and survey ship. It's not much of a battleship, but it looks like it fits that role. It looks like it was designed for such a role, and the overall look of it is something I like. It kind of echoes a classic design of TOS, but in a sort of Voyager era time span. There's something I like about the design. I can't really explain, but it has an emergency medical hologram, advanced sick bay, and advanced suites in this USS Canary Islands, the example one. So they are built for crisis and emergency response, and they have the trait of respected, so they're good at what they do, but they're still reasonably armed. They've got sort of low-power phaser arrays and some photon torpedoes as well, and a low-power tractor beam, but mainly they're focused on relief efforts. So they've got the emergency medical hologram and so forth. Got the Olympic class, the classic sort of space frame for a science vessel or a medical vessel. So these are kind of, they have a special rule of do no harm. They're considered a non-combatant, and its phaser system is seen as defensive only. So if you use the phaser system for any other reason than self-defense, you generate 1 threat per scene. In addition, any characters on an Olympic-class vessel may once per adventure gain an extra d20 for a task involving convincing another group of the good intentions of Starfleet, the Federation, or the crew themselves due to the reputation of these hospital vessels. That's pretty cool. And as you can see, they do have phaser arrays, but they're only strength 6. They got a decent tractor beam at strength 3 in this example, the USS Salk. The weapons rating is real low, but the sensors and computers are high, and the medicine department is at the max of 5. They've got an advanced sick bay, they've got dedicated personnel for medicine, they've got an EMH, emergency medical hologram, and they've got modular laboratories. So yeah, these are the ships you want if you're trying to save a planet from a plague or help clean up after a battle or something. Then we got the Steam Runner class, which is a rugged little guy. There's a special rule here for Steam Runner separation. So the small secondary hull back here can be jettisoned as a sizable emergency lifeboat. It has limited impulse power and no capability for warp, no talents or weapons, and uses the systems and departments of a Type 6 shuttle. Once detached, the primary hull is unable to re-enter warp and has all of its systems reduced by 2. So you really want to be pretty desperate to do that, but at least you have the capability to do that if you're really in desperate need to evacuate the crew. You have a sizable lifeboat to kind of get everybody off. So the USS Appalachia is a good example. It's a technical testbed ship. So it's got some decent phaser arrays and photon torpedoes, as well as a decent tractor beam. It's got good engines at 11 and pretty sort of average-ish department ratings. But it does have advanced sensor suites and shields, backup EPS conduits, and improved warp. So it's pretty nippy when it needs to be. The Defiant class, Federation warship. So it has a special rule here of a cloaking device. So this was the one ship that was allowed to have a cloaking device due to an agreement with the Romulans. So activating the device is a control plus engineering task of difficulty 2. This is by the ship's engines plus security, performed from the tactical position, and has a power requirement of 3. While cloaked, you cannot attack, nor can it be the target, unless the attacker has found some way of detecting the ship. And the shields are down while you're cloaked as well. It takes a minor action to decloak. Any task related to using the cloaking device has a +1 complication range because of the mismatch between Romulan and Fed technology. But you can see right away, weapons 13, massive. So it's a tiny, but tough ship. Of course, the classical example is the USS Defiant itself. It's got powerful phaser arrays with 8 dice of damage, weapons of 13. It's got phaser cannons, which again, 10 dice of damage and versatile 2, but only at close range. It's got quantum torpedoes with 9 dice of damage, vicious 1, calibration and high yield, and a relatively weak tractor beam. But it also has ablative armor, fast targeting systems, and of course the wonderful cloaking device. So it is really a tough little ship. We got the Norway class, which I love, and it's got a special rule for backpacking. So they can tow cargo containers while at warp between their widely spaced nacelles. This extra equipment provides the advantage. We have that in scenes where the game master feels the extra supplies and parts can come in handy. All contests have their difficulty and complication range increased by 1 to represent the difficulties in keeping the cargo container secure. Failure on these tasks can be resolved by the loss of the containers or by damage to the vessel. So they've got a big space between their nacelles, and you can shove some cool stuff in there.
which could come in handy, but it makes it a little bit less maneuverable. So a good example, we have the USS Yuzhny with relatively mediocre phaser arrays, photon torpedoes, decent tractor beam. It's got an advanced sick bay, IMH, improved damage control, and redundant systems, and a great sensor rating at 11, and a good medicine rating of 4. So it's a multi-role explorer, not built for battle so much. We have the Intrepid class, of course, which is the base class of the USS Voyager. So this was the first ship, I think, to use bioneural gel packs for computer components. And of course, it has the ability to travel extremely fast, warp 9.975. And it has the characteristic ability to sort of tilt up its warp nacelles to basically have a better, less disruptive effect on subspace when it travels at high warp. So the Voyager was a Pathfinder reconnaissance ship. It was top of the line at the time. Later on, it incorporates Borg systems as well. It's got strong engines and computers at 11, decent sensors at 10, great science and con capacity, so it's very reliable and good for science missions. Got decent phaser arrays and photon torpedoes, tractor beam strength 3, and it's a relatively small ship for a main series show at scale 4 compared to the Galaxy at scale 6, for example. It also has advanced sensor suites, and the emergency medical hologram, of course, one of the best characters on the show, improved reaction control system, and improved warp drive through its fancy nacelles. Then we have the Sabre class. Some of the fans seem to like this one. I'm not sure exactly why, but there you go. It seems to be good for crisis and emergency response and tactical operations. Yeah, it's got +2 in con, +1 security at base, so yeah, I could see it being useful and tactical. And here's an example of one. In fact, the USS Peel, its mission profile was tactical. It's got good phaser arrays at 7 dice, good torpedoes at 7 dice, and a strong tractor beam. It's got a 4 in security and con, so it's good for piloting and security tasks. Good sensors at 11. Also ablative armor, high power tractor beam, so you can pump even more power if a ship tries to escape your tractor beam, and improved impulse drive for more maneuverability. Then we have the wonderful Sovereign class, the Enterprise E. I've got a statue of this in my place, and I love it. This is what we saw emerge in the movie era of TNG. And the Enterprise, I think this appeared in First Contact, maybe before that. But yeah, scale 6, it's an absolutely massive ship. We've got lots of improved systems, including quantum torpedoes. We have a strength 5 tractor beam, just like the Galaxy class. It has an emergency medical hologram, which we didn't have on the Galaxy, and an improved warp drive at the base. The Enterprise E was a real ship-of-the-line flagship. Look at all these talents. You've got 9 dice of phaser arrays. You've got 7 dice of quantum torpedoes. You've got your strength 5 tractor beam, advanced sensors. It's got its command ship talent, diplomatic suites, EMH, improved hull, improved warp drive. So, yeah, this is a tough ship and huge. Then we have the Luna class. The classic example of which is the USS Titan. And they also have the special rule of mission pod. So you can swap out the pod on top here, depending on the mission profile. And you can swap it out as if it were a single talent, and you'll get 2 different talents as a result. So the USS Titan was designated a multi-role explorer, and of course was captained by William Riker. And you can read about that in the USS Titan book series, which I strongly recommend for fans of the franchise. It's got good phaser arrays at 7 dice, great sensors at 12, and good science facilities in the science department at 4. It's got some quantum torpedoes, strength 4 tractor beam, advanced research facilities, advanced sensor suites, EMH, high-res sensors, and secondary reactors. So very good in its assigned role. But of course, you can swap that pod out and do other stuff. And it's scale 5, so it's a pretty decent cruiser-sized ship. Not as large as the Galaxy, but still pretty big. Now we have the fan-favorite Prometheus class, which appeared in Voyager. This one has the special rule of multi-vector assault mode. So it splits into 3 layers of ships. Each one spawns little warp-sustaining nacelles. You can just see one that's kind of poking out there. So when that top half of the ship comes up, the warp sustainer engine pops up and keeps it going at the speed of the original ship. And it can maintain, actually, a top warp speed of 9.99 for 12 hours, so it's extremely fast. And, so it's got that amazing multi-vector assault mode talent, as well as redundant systems, obviously. It has many little engine nacelles on it, because it's got the 4 main ones, the top and bottom parts of the ship, and the middle section has its own warp sustainers as well. It's got tough phaser arrays with 8 dice, photon torpedoes, tractor beam. It's a command ship with electronic warfare systems, multi-vector assault mode, and redundant engines, of course. And this is the USS Cerberus. The Prometheus class is a cool one to work with. I think a lot of groups would find it interesting because, it's a tough ship. I mean, you start out with weapons 11, but it's also kind of a technical anomaly. It's a new way of fighting for Starfleet, so using it effectively in battle could be quite an interesting challenge. Now we have the Vesta class. This is a Star Trek Online design, which you can kind of tell from the color scheme. So this came about in the 2380s. So we have on this one quite a bit of engine power at 12, and computers as well. And this is the USS Ostia as the example. So it's a multi-role explorer. It's got phaser arrays with 8 dice and phaser cannons with 10 dice. So it's got the firepower of the Defiant up close. Plus it has quantum torpedoes at strength 6 plus vicious 1 high yield and calibration. And a strength 5 tractor beam as well. Plus loads of advanced systems, high-res sensors, advanced shields. And it's got quantum slipstream burst drive as well as a regular warp drive. Then we have the Ross class. So again, we're getting towards the latter end of the 24th century here. This was launched in 2381. So this has an EXEO holographic core special rule. So it allows the ship to support a holographic life form as a part of its crew. Can be of any discipline as it does not count against the ship's crew support total. It also has a primitive mobile emitter, but is not as advanced as the Doctor's 29th century emitter from Voyager, and will not function more than 100,000 kilometers away from the core itself. But it also can improve this holographic organism, so that's pretty cool. So alongside that, you have an example of the USS Ross with a technical test bed. You've got phaser arrays, photon torpedoes, and a strong tractor beam. You also have secondary reactors, saucer separation, high-res sensors. So yeah, pretty decent ship, and I like that it's got this holographic core. I've not seen that before in a ship. That might be a Starfleet Online thing. Or Star Trek Online, rather. Then we have the Inquiry class, launched in 2394. So we have the USS Zheng He, the command ship for the first Devron Heavy Response Squadron. So it's designed for strategic and diplomatic operations. We've got good computers and sensors there, decent structure. Pretty much command department is the strongest at 4, everything else is at 2 or 3. It's got phaser arrays at decent strength, phaser banks as well, which are versatile but don't have area or spread capability. Quantum torpedoes and tractor beam of strength 4, pretty decent. It's a pretty big ship as well, scale 5. Got ablative armor, advanced sensors, command ship, improved power, and improved warp. Then we have the new Reliant class. So this one has the quantum slipstream burst drive. So it's a stepping stone to a fully fledged quantum slipstream drive. So you can enter quantum slipstream for 30 minutes at a time, moving the ship 150 light years before shutting down. Then you need 12 hours to reset and 3 power to operate it. It's experimental, so it needs a lot of maintenance and can be prone to failure. Warp drive is considered separate from this, so you can use warp whenever you want normally, but you can do the slipstream burst to get you 150 light years in a shot, basically, which is pretty awesome. The example ship is the USS Larkin, which along with the quantum slipstream burst drive has advanced sick bays, big shuttle bays, and modular laboratories, and works well as a crisis and emergency response ship. Then we have the Sutherland class, which has a big old pod here on the back, and of course, like the Nebula class, can be replaced with other mission pods. It comes out of the base with phaser arrays and photon torpedoes, decent strength tractor beam. This one has a sensors mission pod, so it's more of an exploring ship. It's got advanced sensor suites, backup conduits, fast targeting systems, high-res sensors, and a sensors mission pod. And it can separate the saucer as well. And you can see it's extremely good in the sensors department as well. And pretty good with engineering and science departments-wise. Then we have the Gagarin class. It has a refracting energy shunt special rule. So it can use its deflector array to temporarily absorb energy from a target vessel and channel that into its own power reserves. So once per scene, you can spend 3 momentum to reduce an enemy starship's power by 3 and give their own ship 3 bonus power, even exceeding the ship's maximum power rating. This is executed on a daring plus engineering task with a difficulty of 3. And depending on the results, the game master may create a complication related to the ship's power or weapon system. So that's really cool. A bit risky, but could be very key, particularly if you've got an opponent with a lot of power at hand and you're struggling to maintain parity. We have a tactical operations example here, the USS Empyrean, launched in 2410. It's got strong phaser arrays at 9 dice, phaser cannons at strength 11 dice, which is huge. Quantum torpedoes at 8 strength, decent strength tractor beam. It's got electronic warfare systems, backup conduits, fast targeting, improved damage control, and redundant systems for comms. And it's got great engines at 12 and weapons at 12 as well. So pretty tough little ship. Definitely a good fighter. Then we have the Odyssey class. So this was a fan design that eventually became the Enterprise F, as you can see up here, Here's the example. So this appeared in Star Trek Online, and there was kind of a design contest for what would be the next Enterprise after the Enterprise E. And this was the winner. So it's a pretty cool looking ship. I've got a little statue of this one as well in my house as well, just to expose my nerdiness to you. You can see we got across the board improvement in systems from the Enterprise E and D. It's scale 7, so it's absolutely ginormous. Resistance of 7 as well. Strong shields, loads of power. It's got powerful phaser arrays with 11 dice. Quantum torpedoes with 8 strength, or 8 challenge dice. Strength 6 tractor beam. It's got advanced shields, it's a command ship, it's got diplomatic suites, redundant engines, improved warp, can separate the saucer, and it has secondary reactors, and it has a quantum slipstream burst drive for those 150 light year bursts of speed when you need it. So very, very cool looking ship. From the front, it has this kind of interesting whale-like appearance, which I really like. Then we have the Pathfinder class, so this is kind of the next step past the Intrepid class. You can see the similarities here. It's got a modular mission bay. So a Pathfinder can take one talent from the list below. In fact, it must take one of those. This counts against the ship's maximum number of talents, but the crew may exchange it for another during a week-long layover at a starbase. So you have a small mission bay, smaller than a pond, but if you stop over at a starbase, you can swap it out for any of these other talents, which is pretty awesome. Gives you a lot of flexibility. It's got great computers, sensors, and engines. The Pathfinder, which is the core of the class, it has pretty mediocre phaser arrays and quantum torpedoes, although they do have Vicious 1. Got a captain's yacht, big shuttle bays, high-res sensors, and improved warp drive. So it's pretty good for scale 4. And it's got great ratings in con and science. So it's good at collecting data and very good at being nimble, I suppose. The modular mission bay, of course, you could change out some of those talents for others anytime you want, as long as you have a week to spare. And then we have various small craft. So the classic Phoenix, Zephram Cochrane's first successful warp drive ship. The United Earth shuttle pods. We got the Class C shuttlecraft. This is Class F shuttle from the original series. It talks a little bit about some variants of those. We've got orbital transfer pods, the worker bees, which we saw on the cover actually. And they've got work bee tools, so they can do external repairs on ships. And we have some cute little diagrams of some of these small micro range craft and extended range craft. The Type 6 shuttle. So this came about during the TNG era. So it has Type 4 phaser banks, but this causes escalation 2. So if you try to defend yourself in this shuttle, you will have to deal with additional threat being added to the GM's pile. Better to just try and get away, perhaps, depending on the situation. The Type 7 shuttle has a well-supplied special rule. So it has many storage compartments containing spare parts, emergency kits, and survival equipment. Characters may attempt to insert the shuttle for parts and supplies while on an away mission by attempting an insight engineering task at difficulty 2. This produces the advantage well supplied. So very cool. This was in 2359. So this is the Type 7 shuttle. Then we have the Type 8 shuttle, which was introduced with the Sovereign, Intrepid, and Nova class. So basically it has introduced some phaser arrays, which again have escalation 2 attached to them. And it's got a more rugged design. It can have a higher sustained warp speed of 2.8, capable of warp 3.1, but only for short periods. Then we have the Federation Attack Fighter. So this we saw briefly in Deep Space Nine. Typically piloted by a single crew member. So it's very tiny. It's scale 1, power 4, shields 4, but it's got phaser banks and micro torpedoes, which can do a surprising amount of damage. And it's got an improved reaction control system, so it's a toughie to hit, actually. I love that they have that in here. We got the Danube class runabout as well, which we saw a lot in Deep Space Nine. It's got customizable modules, so you can customize it for cargo transport, for long duration missions. So you can add sleeping quarters for 4 people, basically. You can configure it to carry 10 passengers or up to 40 emergency passengers, or you can give it weapons for the cost of escalation 2, and you will get additional high-powered weaponry. So you can add to its phaser banks and micro torpedoes. Then we have the Aero shuttle, which was designed for atmospheric operations. It's got phaser banks at medium range, versatile 2, improved hull integrity, and it's designed for flight. So it's highly maneuverable in atmosphere. Any maneuvering, handling, or control while in atmosphere has its difficulty lowered by 1. The Aero shuttle may be added to any starship as a talent, so that's cool. If you plan to do a lot of atmospheric investigations or planetary surveys, you might want to get yourself one of those. The Captain's Yacht, typically not much for fighting, but it does have some self-defense, a little bit of phaser banks, micro torpedoes, and has diplomatic suites. So the Captain's Yacht can be used to treat dignitaries from who might be visiting the vessel, and it's designed for comfort. It's peaceful, it's pleasant, it's luxurious. It's got a relaxed atmosphere to it, and again, you may add it to any starship as a talent. I guess you'd have to be as long as the ship is big enough to have a scale to a ship attached to it. Then you have Federation mission scouts, and then we have the Delta Flyer and Delta Flyer 2, which are again from Voyager. So there was an upgraded design in the second one that incorporated some Borg engineering. So they were designed by Tom Paris to be kind of super nimble. They have phaser arrays, photonic missiles, ablative armor, and improved warp drive. They have special rules for hot rod, so the propulsion systems can operate at peak efficiency even under difficult circumstances. So all increases of complication range to a task involving the engine system resulting from environmental conditions are reduced by 1. Delta Flyer 2 uses the same stats, except that the Game Master may choose to allow the players to swap out the talent Improved Warp Drive for Improved Impulse Drive. If this option is chosen, it is permanent. So there you go. Then we have some space stations. So we've got the International Space Station, which is kind of funny, from 1998. Then we have the United Earth Starfleet Construction Slip, which we saw on the cover, launched in 2140. We have a K-class border outpost, again from the TOS era. So here we're starting to get some decent weaponry, strong phaser banks and photon torpedoes, and a strong tractor beam as well. Then we have the regular class multi-purpose station. So these again have pretty decent phaser banks, but not as strong as the border outpost for natural reasons. But they do have strong tractor beams, and they're more for science research or admin or bureaucracy tasks. Then we have Space Dock. So these are massive. They've got comms 15, structure 15. They're ginormous. They hold they're 7 kilometers tall and 5 kilometers wide. Space Dock is absolutely enormous. It's got phaser banks with 21 dice, phaser cannons with 22 at close range, phaser arrays with 20 dice, and versatile area or spread. Plus it's got photon torpedoes and a strength 15 tractor beam. So attacking Space Dock is a pretty bad idea. Likewise, Federation Starbase, they're not as strong as Space Dock, which is like the starbase of starbases, but it's got resistance 12, shield 21. You've got very strong phaser cannons at 17, very strong phaser arrays at 15, lots of photon torpedoes, and a strength 11 tractor beam. So if you want to attack a Fed starbase, you better be prepared. Then we got Deep Space Nine, or Turok Nor, which was originally designed by the Cardassians and then taken over by the Bajorans and the Federation. So its profile is border enforcement. It's got a big structure, 14, and strong weapons at 12. We've got lots of phaser cannons, phaser arrays, photon torpedoes, strength 11 tractor beam. It's got an advanced sick bay, fire base, rapid fire torpedoes, repair crews, and a very sturdy construction. It was built to be tough by the Cardassians. We have Narendra Station, Starbase 364. So again, we've got really tough weapons, skill 13, resistance 13, and a shield of 18. Yeah, and very strong sensors and structure. So again, not to be messed with lightly. Then we have a Federation border listening post. So these are much smaller at scale 8, but still bigger than most ships. And they still carry strong phaser banks, photon torpedoes, and a strength 7 tractor beam. So basically they have the living quarters, central core hull, which has engineering, maintenance shops, and then there are massive sensor arrays, basically. So it's all about electronic warfare, high-res sensors, and working as subspace relays as well. Then we have, this is actually a subspace relay, sorry. So this can work together with subspace relays. This is an actual subspace relay. So they do have some defenses as well, and a strong tractor beam, as well as redundant comm systems, which makes sense because they are primarily comms relays. And here we have a diagram of Space Dock, it looks like, along with dock operations. And then some tips for game mastering. So some advanced rules for jury rigging systems together. The systems that will get a penalty depending on your D20 roll. How you might want to build a shuttle like Tom Paris, the difficulties of piloting a starship, and working with range. So basically, close range is ships within the same zone, medium is within one zone in any direction, long is within 2 zones, and extreme is more than 2 zones. And of course, the distance will modify the difficulty of making attacks and so forth. So power requirements as well for impulse are low, and you can move to any zone within long range. Maneuver task has a power requirement of 0, and it moves anywhere within 1 zone. And warp, you can move 2 or more zones when not in combat. But of course, there is the Picard maneuver if you're feeling very clever. Scale and effects. So there's some additional clarifications on that. Using space-based hazards as well. There's some cool stuff in here about minefields, debris fields, novas, supernovas, pulsars, black holes, gravitational waves, different types of nebula, all that kind of stuff. So, and then the effects that they have on the ship. So, more than just fighting other ships, you can also have to fight with space itself. Then they're dealing with diagnostics and maintenance, which may then lead to some desperate jury rigging, how to deal with manufacturing troubles, and spending threat to create troubles that will then need to be fixed by the crew, and some examples of downtime needed for maintenance on key systems, which is useful when your ship needs to get repaired after a heavy dose of combat. And then there's some stuff about useful tips for coming up with creative challenges or extended tasks. So some useful GM stuff in here too, although it's pretty short compared to the main attraction, which is the many space frames. And then we have some mission briefs, which I'm not going to tell you about because your GM might want to use them. And then we have some more starship silhouettes on the end papers here. So we've got Steam Runners, Constellations, Refit, Constitution, Pathfinder, Intrepid, Saber, Defiant, Oberth, Nova, and Hermes. So I guess maybe across all the end papers we've covered at least most of the classes in the book. But yeah, anyway, as you can see, as usual, I talked way longer than I wanted to, but it's a fantastic book. If you've got anything to do with running a game based on a starbase or a starship, particularly starships, you need this book. It's got excellent rules for more weapons. The mind warfare stuff is cool and adds extra tension in the right kind of circumstances. It's got more space hazards for the GM to throw at you, and it's got so many customizable space frames and rules for making your own if that's somehow not enough. So if you're playing Feds and you're going into space, buy this book. So with that, I hope that was helpful for you guys. If you've got any questions about this book or about SCA in general, or you got ideas for things you want me to cover in detail, please let me know via the comments, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. In the meantime, stay safe and well, take care, and bye-bye.